All right, everybody, welcome to this session of Win-Loss Week. This is the title of the session is Lessons Learned from Winning in B2B Environments. So we're pretty excited about this. We have two legends here joining us, Jim Steele and John D'Agostino. I'll introduce them and we'll jump right into this. We're super excited to have them here, and we're thankful that they would be willing to take time to spend time with us and with you. So, Jim Steele, if you don't know who Jim Steele is, here, time to find out. Jim's awesome. He's a legend. He spent 12 years at Salesforce, joined them when they were about $22 million in revenue, and was there leading global sales and operations until they got to $5 billion in revenue. So literally the rocket ship of rocket ships he was on, and led that team, super successful. In addition to that, he's also been an amazing leader in president, CRO roles at companies like Ariba, Yext, InsideSales.com. Spent roughly 20 years at IBM. Yeah. Okay. So he's been around the block, seen a lot, done a lot, and been really, really successful. So we're excited to have Jim here with us. We also have John D'Agostino, our good friend of Closed. John's great. He also brings a unique, stellar resume to the table. Over 30 years of experience in B2B sales. In his most recent experience, he was Executive Vice President of Global Sales for Qualtrics, and there he led the sales team to grow from $42 million in ARR to $550 million in ARR, scaled the sales team from a small team based in Provo, Utah, to a global team of over 500 people, and helped them get from a valuation of roughly $350 million to an $8 billion acquisition by SAP. And prior to that, he spent time leading the Americas team at Parametric Technology Corporation, PTC, a legendary software sales company. So excited to have John here as well. And the goal of this conversation is just to have a really candid conversation with a couple of guys who have been really successful at one of the reasons why we like win-loss is win-loss helps us learn about how we can do better. And it's as important to learn from your wins as it is to learn from your losses. So one of the things we want to talk about with some guys who have seen some wins and probably seen some losses. Maybe one of the first things, and I'll direct this to Jim. I mean, you've seen some success. You've seen some big outcomes.
This is his yard, for example.
Yeah. If you were talking to yourself 30 years ago, what would you tell yourself about, I need to go build a team that has the right culture that can go win in the market that we're chasing? What lessons have you learned in the last 30, 35 years that you wish you could go back and tell yourself today?
Yeah, well, thanks. Great to participate in this session, especially with my good friend John over here, who I'll look forward to learning from as well. The number one thing that I preach to all of my sales teams over my now 43 years in sales is to have a maniacal focus on your customer. If you're obsessed with their success and you're listening to what their challenges are and what their business top initiatives are, the things that are important to them, and look through the lens of your customer at everything comes naturally. So I call it LVI, listen, validate, and inspire. The listen part is the discovery, just learning about the customer's business. The validation is playing back to them what you've learned about their business, so you're building that credibility and trust with them. And then once you've done that, and that could be a sales call, but it's typically a sales campaign that could take up to a year or more, depending on the size of the deal. And then the inspire part is everything you've learned now you're playing back to the customer. Here's what we can do for you. Here's a solution that will address your requirements. To me, that's number one. Listen to the customer.
I love it. One of the funny things, in the work that we do at Closed, listening to customers talk about why they did or don't choose certain teams in certain companies, sales empathy, communication, really understanding the customer is like one of the number one reasons why companies lose.
And the empathy part is so critical. There's a lot of tech companies that have been branded as being arrogant and cocky, and they take the customers for granted. And I love when we're competing against those companies and we can go back to I'll use Siebel because Siebel's no longer a company, but they were so cocky and so arrogant. And I told my sales team, look, we are the David against the Goliath of Siebel in the early days at Salesforce. And if we can tell the customer, look, we are going to, please take that leap of faith with us. We are going to prove to you how we can deliver success to you. And it's great to be passionate. It's great to be confident, but it's really bad to be cocky and arrogant. It's going to come back and bite you.
First of all, I agree entirely. That's the place to start. I think another element that sort of adds to that really well is the way the salespeople sort of treat themselves and how they see themselves in front of the customer, but also in front of their entire ecosystem. There's too many people out there that are depending on everybody to go do something for them. There's a lack of people out there who truly have the ecosystem rooting for them. And I believe this concept of getting people to root for you is just about, it's right up there as one of the most important things you can learn in sales. And this is just looking back at a career saying, why did all these things go right? Why did these promotions come? Why did these deals come? And what you think about is, it doesn't come natural to everybody, but to think about your ecosystem. If you've got your boss who's rooting for you, if you've got your employees rooting for you, if you've got your peers rooting for you, if your competitors aren't going to root for you, but they might respect you, and then your customer is rooting for you, you really don't spend any time worrying about yourself. You're selfless entirely. So now you're focused entirely on the customer. Meanwhile, the entire ecosystem who's involved in the deal is looking to say, we're going to run through walls for this individual just because of the nature of how they work and how they do business. So get everybody out there rooting for you, and you will win deals. And you will find yourself getting promoted, and people are going to do more for you than you could expect.
So you kind of started touching on this, but you guys have hired a lot of people. You've managed a lot of people. What are some of the attributes that you look for and try to develop in the best sales leaders, sales reps that you've ever worked with?
So attributes, I would probably say first is, I think, a motor, right? You don't want to have to motivate the person to get up and get out of bed every day. I think that's one very important one. That's hard to go push people to want to work hard. I think that EQ is very important. How do you get people to root for you? That really comes through this emotional style of thinking and working and being, thoughtful about that. And then intellect is becoming more and more important. I think back in the old days, you could depend a little bit more on the relationship sale. A really good night out, going and having great dinners, and then you've got the ecosystem of other people. Nowadays, Jim mentioned this before we started today, that customers are pretty studied on our technology before we even get to them nowadays. So if a sales rep shows up and they're just bringing to the table the old relationship sale, it's not going to happen anymore. You've got to know your product better, and you've got to know their company better than they know their own company. So now you're becoming a true consultant.
I would add to that, what I look for is salespeople that have grit. You could call it scrappiness. They have to be self-starters, to John's point, and they have to connect with people. And I think, one of the things that I love about John is he's genuine. He's genuine. He's the real deal, right? And customers buy from people that they connect with. And if you're genuine, if you're not selling to them, think about getting a call from a telemarketer. The first thing you want to do is you want to hang up, or if you're polite, like we all are nice people, you might engage with them, but you basically just want to tell them stop talking, stop selling. And that's back to the listening part, where it's okay to tell stories, but if you're selling and it feels like you're selling, the customer is going to be sitting there thinking, how can I get out of this call with this sales rep? So I say, look, thank you so much for sharing with me your top objectives and what you're trying to accomplish, strategically over the next few years. We've been working with this customer in a similar industry, and here's what we've been doing with them. And I can give you the sales pitch, but I'd rather have you hear it directly from the customer. Can I have so-and-so at this customer connect with you and share their story? And frankly, that was the key success factor at Salesforce. When I remember our first Dreamforce, if anyone's been to a Dreamforce conference, the first one was in 2003. And we had about 200 people in the company, and that's when we were doing 20-something million in revenue. And I owned all the customer-facing part of the business, sales, the services, the consulting, and the partner organization. And so I had to get people to fill the room, right? And we got the people to fill the room, and the night before, we're going through this product pitch. It was like the product roadmap, and Mark Benioff basically puts his hand in his face and says, this is going to be a disaster. This is going to be like every other tech conference, us getting up there and committing the future, not having it today, talking about what will be the case. And they're all going to shake their heads. They're going to say, this is no different than Oracle, SAP, or Microsoft, or any of those big tech companies. And so he said, I'll start by sharing the vision of the company that we want to change the world of technology and deliver it as a service over the internet versus a perpetual license that they have to install themselves. And then we're going to open up to customers and listen to their stories. I said, Mark, this starts in like 12 hours. I haven't prepped any of the customers. He said, perfect. He said, we want them impromptu. We don't want it scripted. No one will believe it anyway if it's scripted. So let's just he said, I'm going to finish my keynote, and then I'm going to say, open mic, we want to hear from you. And we're all like, this is not going to end well. And sure enough, he stops his keynote, he opens it up, and customers started slowly coming up to the mic. And this first guy started sharing this glowing story about Salesforce. And Mark stopped him and said, wait a second, did we script you? And he said, no, I haven't talked to anybody. He said, no one wants to hear about the good stuff. Tell us the problems that you had, and how did we together solve those problems? And it was such a genuine story. And I told that story so many times to my salespeople. I said, look, get the customer to tell the story. You can share the customer story if the customer's not sitting there, but don't sell, because when you're selling, it's uncomfortable and they're going to shut down.
When you think about being successful in an organization, it's a team sport. There's more than one, you have to have product features get built, and that may not be in your purview. You need to maybe adjust pricing, and that might not be in your purview. How do you work effectively cross-functionally with other parts of your organization to enable that growth? What would you tell someone who's struggling? I'm in marketing, I'm hearing that we need to adapt or change some elements of our sales process. Or I'm in sales and I'm hearing over and over that this one or two product features are preventing me from winning. How would you coach somebody on how they could better interact authentically, genuinely, and effectively with the rest of their team?
I'll tell you what, I think a big deal is consistency. And I think everybody here can probably, think about different people in your career who do it well and some that don't. I have a real problem with people who appear in front of different characters in a meeting and you get a different version of that person. Some people are just as authentic as can be. They're casual, they're normal, and then all of a sudden the board meeting comes and they turn into some other person that you don't even recognize. And I think I need to see consistency across the board. I want people to be the same way generally as they are talking individually in a casual manner or talking seriously in a big meeting, but you can't change who you are all the time. I think the ecosystem and other people who need to support you and work around you, when you say authenticism, I think that's what authenticism comes from many times. It means that the person isn't kidding. They're not putting on a show. They're not faking it for certain people. If I'm having a conversation with you and you talk to me a certain way, and then another person joins the conversation and you start talking to me that way and you got a new tone and a new talk track, I lose trust right there. You know what I mean? I'm a big fan of, tell the truth. And I just think it's easier to help people, and people can be trusted more, if they're just being honest about things with who they are, and that makes everybody else really want to root for that individual.
I would add that selling is a team sport, right? And it has to be across the whole enterprise. And the sales team is usually the quarterback. They're the ones that are driving and pulling the team together from across the enterprise. And that's essentially my role today within Salesforce. Is as you get bigger, it becomes harder and harder to bring the full power of your company. When I started, we had 170 people, 20 million in revenue. Today, it's 26 billion in revenue and 65,000 people. And we have great products, we have great services, and we have great people. The challenge is, how do you pull all that together? So what I coach the sales teams on all the time is, look, you hold the key to pulling it all together. People want to be associated with a winning team. So the way you do that is you represent the customer viewpoint. You're bringing together the customer requirements and pulling the team together to solve a problem for the customer that will result in a nice revenue win. But more importantly, you want that customer to be a reference and be on stage, like in our case at Dreamforce, sharing this story. And everything goes back to that customer. And I remember my first week at Salesforce, I was sitting there. My office was always right next to Mark Benioff. And so Mark Benioff walked into my office and he said, "What are you doing here?" And I kind of laughed. I thought he was joking, like, "Oh, So I jumped up. I said, "Oh, I'm your new president, Jim Steele." And I went to shake his hand. He looked at me, didn't smile. He said, No, what are you doing here?" And I said, I'm working for you. Like, what do you mean? He said, "I don't see any customers here." He said, "I did not pay you to be an armchair quarterback." He said, "I paid you to be in front of the customer. You're the face of Salesforce to our customers and to our people. I don't want to see you here." And so that basically, for me, started a 12 and a half year nonstop journey around the world, meeting with every customer, every team, and basically, I put 230, 240 nights in a hotel and, had all the top tiers of airline, benefits, but it was a message to me. And I was always that customer-facing guy at IBM and Ariba, but he wanted to make it clear that he did not want an armchair quarterback. He wanted somebody representing. And what I found is, going into board meetings and going into our executive leadership team meetings, if you had an opinion that was not grounded in a customer requirement or coming directly from a customer experience, Mark would dismiss you. The product team sometimes would come and say, "Oh, we got this great product, blah, blah, blah." And he turned to me and said, "Jim, what's our customer going to say about this?" And if the customer, if it wasn't validated by a customer, it would be like he'd dismiss you. So every time I had an idea or a change in direction, I'd have to talk about it in the context of a customer requirement. And that gave me credibility. Otherwise, I would be dismissed.
It's beautiful. It's actually amazing how when you can come with that, this is what the customer is requiring, this is what the buyers are asking for, it gives you momentum, especially when it's validated by the customers themselves and not just somebody in an echo chamber.
Absolutely.
That happens in companies. This has been great. There may be a little bit of background noise where there's actually a private airport right here next to, we're at Jim's ranch up in Midway, Utah, Heber, Utah.
Yes.
Up here surrounded in the mountains, and you can hear some planes flying in every once in a while, so that'll just give you a sense for the ambiance. This is a pretty fun place. I wish you guys could all be here. You guys have seen a lot change, right? You were at the forefront of driving some of this change. I don't think anybody could argue that Salesforce is not the giant that has driven a lot of the change and shift to technology in sales organizations and go-to-market motions over the last 25, 30 years. As you guys think back, how has technology changed? What have been some of the biggest changes that you've seen? I'll start with Jim, because you're still seeing this today, right? Being in charge, president of global strategic accounts at Salesforce, Salesforce coming together with Slack, that's changing. That's an even bigger whammy for companies to be able to do. What are some of the biggest changes you've seen? And then maybe the follow-up to that's going to be, what's next? What else are you seeing that's shifting it?
I started my career 43 years ago, so I've seen a lot of change. And one thing for sure, like when you're in roles like John and I have had, and anyone in sales in particular, when you're dealing with customers, you have to reinvent yourself all the time, or you risk becoming a dinosaur, right? And so I've had to rethink how I engage constantly, and technology's been a big driver of that, and embrace change. I mean, that's the one thing. Like, I remember again, Mark Benioff coming in after like a month of talking to me about certain things that I thought were absolutely crazy, because that was not part of my conventional wisdom that I had learned at IBM over 23 years. I'm like, how is that going to work in this environment? And he come in and said, Jim, I don't get it. I've talked to you about this like 3 times. Maybe it was an organizational change. Maybe it was a way we packaged a deal for a customer. Maybe it was just so many different ideas that as an entrepreneur and founder of a company, you're always thinking and coming up with new ideas. My job is to execute, but I couldn't imagine doing some of the things. So he said, did I ask you to commit a crime? No. Is it immoral? No. Is it going to physically hurt someone? No. He said, what's the worst that can happen? Just go do it, and let's see. If it doesn't work, we can always go back. He said, all I know is that if you don't change, you stagnate and you die. He said, so you have to continually challenge yourself. So I went from being passive resistant to all these, what I thought were crazy ideas, to being enthusiastically embracing them and saying, you know what, guys, we're going to learn something from this. Let's just go do it. And 9 times out of 10, something good came out of these changes. But from a technology point of view, the biggest change I've seen since I started my career in sales is everything my customers on Wall Street that I was selling to when I was selling mainframe computers with IBM, everything they learned about IBM was through me. I was the conduit. I would deposit big manuals on their desks. I'd send them handwritten notes. I'd show up every day. I'd walk the halls. I'd talk to everybody. And I'd be on rotary dial phone calls to them, and everything. There was no conference calls, there was no Zoom, there was no internet, there was no email even back then. And so I was 100% of what they learned was from me and industry conferences that they would attend where they'd see other customers in the market. And so I'd have to start the sale from the very beginning to gather requirements, create interest, and all the way through to sale. And that could take years. Like IBM's sales cycle for these big mainframes could take years. Now, 80% of what a customer knows about your products and services and what they want to do has already been baked from all their discovery and investigation on the internet. So by the time they engage with you, they already know kind of what they want. So you better be very crisp. You have to condense the sales cycle, because you have to capture their interest right away and give them a reason to want to continue to engage with you. You don't have the 3 martini lunches that I used to have back in the 80s, in New York City. And so that's the biggest change. They've already done a lot of their work. So you have to quickly establish your credibility, build relationship and trust in a very short period of time, and then be all about them, and help them. And like John was saying before, you're building champions inside the business, inside your customers, inside your own business, and you're establishing that support team that eventually will sign off on a deal. And if they don't like you, if they don't want to do business with you, it doesn't matter how great your technology is, you're not going to win that business. They want to do business with people that they like and they trust.
Totally. I love it. It's crazy to think about I can't imagine. You guys probably had to drive around vans full of like manuals and stuff like that to go drop it off at people. John once told me a story of him walking around with a pocket full of change so that he could make phone calls on a payphone.
About to tell that story just now because it's sort of funny.
So tell the story.
When we talk about technology changes, think about it. When I started in 1990, just coming out of college, I worked for Pitney Bowes, selling mailing and shipping systems. So we were just everyone had a bunch of zip codes, and you went out and you were up and down the street knocking on doors, trying to get past a gatekeeper, get to a decision maker and sell them something, or get pipelines sort of underway. There wasn't a computer with email, and as far as cold calling, you'd be sitting there with dimes and quarters or whatever it was, putting it in payphones, calling up and making this really sophisticated appointment with them, and you're looking at their building. You could see the guy stand up and get out of his chair to go answer his phone. And so that's a technology like change that occurred. All of a sudden you had your cell phone in your car, or one of those box type phones years ago. But I would say, just to fast forward where technology helps and hurts, I know it's necessary, and sometimes people can get bogged down in it. I would probably say that one of the toughest changes with technology, but the most necessary ones, is probably Salesforce, right? CRM is right at the center of the world of a salesperson, right? That's like the system of record for what we do with our customers. And when you're first being told everything has to be in there, because if it's not in there properly, all of the reporting and all the decision making that comes out of it is going to be incorrect. That's tough. And as a leader, you've got to convince your team the value of that back, to them, and you've got to dictate certain things, and other things you got to make them want to go do it and see the value themselves. So technology can be really difficult. I know that, and there's different ways to get people encouraged to do certain things. I worked for one of the great CEOs of all time, Dick Harrison, back at PTC, and he was pretty direct. And if I came in and was to bitch about something around, this new CRM system we had at Siebel, I think, to begin with, and he would have a sign on his desk, he'd turn it around and it said, "The excuse department's closed." In other words, it's like, I don't give a shit. Go out and get done what they're telling you to do, and make your whole team do it. And as a leader, if you can't get your whole team to do it, you've lost control of your team, and you're not being respected. It's a red flag for me if an entire team can't sort of do the bare minimum they're being told to do to help the company use the technology appropriately. There's certain things that, is a choice. There's certain things where people can have input. They might be able to sort of be involved on the front end of the implementation, but they can't decide they're just not going to do it. And then there's other times where you'll find technology, maybe we overcook it and we're asking for too many items of information to be pumped into a system. So it's a balance, at best. But yeah, I've seen technology help, and I've seen it hurt. But in general, it's come a long way, and for the most part, it's been significantly different. Like, think about how would we have gotten through COVID just now without Zoom?
Totally.
Right? The automation is really incredible.
It's a beautiful thing. Well, and to Jim's point, the technology makes it so that you can engage with them more effectively. You don't have to be in person with them. They're going to do a lot of the research and everything else before they ever see you. Yeah. So it's important that.
And I think you got to be better now. I think people went through this past year who were selling over Zoom more than ever, and didn't get that chance to be there and use all their charisma, the touch and the feel, and give them a hug and be there with them. I think you got to be sharper and better. If you're going to sell to somebody through Zoom, you better be on the money, because people can pretty easily just lose that connection. Whereas if you're in person, it's pretty hard to just leave the meeting. So I really give people who've excelled in their sales career a ton of credit to have done it during a year when you're doing things cheaper. through technologies like Slack or Zoom or other things, I give people quite a bit of credit who can actually step up to that game.
Yeah, it requires that extra level of tuning. You're listening to them. You're selling. You're selling to their need and not just trying to push a product to them. It's beautiful. We're about wrapping up time. I always like when we do win-loss interviews at Closed. There's a couple of questions I always like to ask. So maybe we'll kind of pivot this to you guys. One question I would ask you is, what would you do differently? You know, you guys you're introspective. You've seen a lot. You've learned a lot. You have some battle scars. You know, what is something that, you know, maybe you would say, I wish I would have done this better. I wish I would have learned this sooner. I wish I would have developed this skill. What's something like that you would, as a leader, retrospectively looking at your career, think about?
One thing that comes to mind for me is when you engage with a customer, you got to think of it as a journey, not a transaction. I think when we're going through training in our companies, like when I started with my sales training at IBM, I was always thinking of the deal. Like the deal is what every salesperson gets excited for, and it's why people get into sales. It's like, you know, it's game time, right? And you know, you might not be working 9 to 5 every day of the week. You might go out and play some rounds of golf. You might do some other things. Like salespeople don't like that structure in general, and they get so focused on the transaction that they lose track of it's a journey with the customer. And if the customer feels like you're just trying to slam down a deal, then they're going to be, you might win that deal, but they're not going to look at you strategically over a period of time. And I look at it like, you know, there are times when I pushed on a deal, on a transaction that hurt the relationship, and I had to work extra hard to make up for that one deal that I was trying to slam down at the end of a quarter or end of the year. And I felt like I really compromised my relationship with the customer, and I had to rebuild that trust over time. So you have to put it in perspective to the customer. You got to show them that, look, you're there to be their partner over a period of time.
I probably wouldn't have changed anything. I don't know. You know, I kind of think about, I feel like I lived through, I was only with 3 companies during my career for 30 years. Pitney Bowes, PTC, and then Qualtrics. And it was all very different motions in a way. I think there was times where I probably overplayed think about the Machiavellian, so would you rather be loved or would you rather be feared? You know, I always had a tendency to sort of lean towards I want to be loved. But then you realize feared is easy actually, because you can just sort of dictate and fire, and that's pretty easy. Being loved is hard, it's complicated, and it sucks up a lot of your oxygen. So I think the right answer is you want both. Like, you want to be loved, but you want really sharp elbows so that people know they're going to get the very best person as a leader they could possibly ever have, but they need to make sure there's certain things that they don't ever cross, right? So you hope for that. So I think there's been times where I've probably overcooked on being loved and got too close to the individual rep or to the individual team member. There's many times where I got very, very close to the customer, which was generally a good thing. And then there was some times where maybe I probably, especially when I went through a couple of back surgeries, I was a bit ornery. I was probably my elbows got a little too sharp at times. I look back at it and it's sort of, I'm surprised sometimes because I didn't have a playbook that I went into it with. Those are the kind of things I guess I would have, changed a bit. I learned a lot too. I wish earlier in my career I would have taken on the things we did at Qualtrics, where we got super aggressively engaged with this very high bar recruiting. I think recruiting is number one by far. Everything else competes for second place. And I think Qualtrics was like the best experience that I've had, and I didn't bring that to Qualtrics. I think I learned it more or less at Qualtrics. And I think I wish that throughout my career I would have thought about recruiting and the value of moving quickly, but never, ever, ever letting go on the high bar. So those are where mistakes got made, but we learned and improved. So that's probably another area that people should think hard about. Don't underestimate how important, especially if you're a young manager, maybe taking on a startup right now. If you can't recruit and you can't hold a high bar and you can't move fast enough, you're probably not going to do too well, because you're not going to get enough good bodies in place. And you got to think about hiring poorly is like putting a sandbag on your back. Hiring really well, it's like taking a sandbag off. So sometimes we would talk about this in my meetings. It's like some of you are putting sandbags on my back and some of you are taking them off. And after that meeting, like for 2 months, nobody asked you to do anything. But I think those are lessons learned. I don't know if that falls into those are improvements that got made along the way where mistakes were there.
Got me thinking about, John and I are similar in that regard. I always wanted to be loved more than feared, and I do think in sales in particular, you bring the best out of people when they're having fun and they're confident in what they're selling. I think there are times in my career, either certain jobs within a company or certain companies, where I wasn't 100% committed to the product and it didn't feel that good about what I was selling. And if you're not comfortable with it, if you're not excited, and you truly don't feel like you're going to help the customer be successful and put your reputation at stake with them, then move on to something else where you feel good about what you're doing. I mean, that to me is so important. And in sales in particular, it's a stressful position to be in. You're always under the gun. So what I'd say, if you have to have a balance between the intensity of sales and the pressure that you're under and the fun side. If you don't have a balance with those two, you're not going to get the best out of your people.
Yeah, you got to really believe the value prop, be excited about it, and then have fun.
And that holds true for any job, actually. If you're not enjoying yourself and feeling good about what you're doing, then you're not giving it your best. And people will know that on the other side. And that's why selling, when you're in front of a customer, again, it's good to be passionate and confident, not cocky and arrogant. But if you've studied the customer, if you've done your homework, you know the product, and then you're in that meeting, instead of being stressed and nervous, you're excited and passionate. The difference between the two is the difference between winning and losing.
And the other thing that adds to what Jim says is, I think the concept of pipeline is so important. Did you ever notice how when your pipeline is just super rich, life in general is just better? You wake up feeling better. You're nicer to your dog and your kids and your wife. You're more fun to be around. When your pipeline is weak and it's slim and you're banking on just one or two deals, you get a little bit ornery. It's Ryan going off to buy the heat. So anyways, I think that's very important. The litmus test a lot of times for me was, I say to people, on Monday morning, when you get out of bed and your feet hit the floor, are you excited about that, or do you feel like, I just want to get back in bed and roll over and sleep for 3 more hours? Because during the greatest times during your career, Monday mornings I was happy to sort of engage, couldn't wait to start getting on the phone and talking to the guys and getting going and working on deals and getting on with customers. And then there's a point where people start to get that stagnancy. You can't let your team get there ever. It happens to everybody, and it's okay to have days or moments, but you can't have like giant cycles of it. It's time to, really think about what's next in that case.
Yeah, love it.
Enjoying, we spend too much time in these roles with people to not have fun doing it, you know what I mean?
Yeah, you want it, and it feeds off of each other. You can feel it. You can feel it. It's awesome. So you guys are busy guys. You have a lot going on. So we're not going to take much more of your time. Anything I haven't asked you about that I should have asked you about that would be good subject matter or parting advice for some of the folks that are going to be listening into this? Think of these as people that are in their career. They're trying to figure out how to help their company win more deals, how to be more successful, how to manage across functions. They're dealing with a world that's full of all sorts of uncertainty and craziness right now. Any other things that you guys would
I got one
espouse?
I'll throw out there, and it has to do with, my shirt says, tell the truth, right? I think it has to do with people have to have a lot more security in themselves. Insecurity is the stuff that makes work not fun. Insecurity is what makes people inauthentic. Insecurity is the stuff where, people are afraid to hear the truth. That's not the world you want to live in. You've got to have the utmost security in yourselves, go above and beyond, and actually just prove that there's nothing really that scares you. So that's why I love so much what you guys do at Closed with respect to, what I call the truth serum. You're getting out the information from the customer, and it's the actual truth of what happened. We don't have to wait for the sales team or the product people to speculate and make up reasons as to why a deal got lost or why something slipped. We have the truth and we can deal with it. We're not afraid of that truth, because if you have the security to engage in that way, you're going to win more deals over the course of time, and you're not going to have to worry about that. But don't be afraid of the truth. You can't help somebody if they're not telling you the truth. It's very difficult to help somebody improve.
Love it.
I would say don't ever give away your power as a salesperson. One of the biggest pitfalls I've seen that salespeople have done is they get into a negotiation with the customer and they say, geez, I would love to do this for you, but my boss is not gonna approve it. When I hear that, it drives me insane, because you've just given away your power. Now, imagine if you were buying a car and the sales guy says, look, this is the best I can do. My manager won't let me. You want to immediately get around that salesperson and go right to the manager. Who's making the decision? I love when salespeople, they own it. They take full ownership. They tell the customer, look, I have studied your business inside and out for the last X number of months or weeks. I know your requirements. I know this solution is going to be amazing for you. We're going to deliver all kinds of great results. And what you're asking for, I'm sorry, I can't support that. It's not a good, I can't put my name on that. It's not a good deal for my company, and I'm sorry. Now, if they want to go around you, at least you didn't give your power away. They're doing it because but if they know that they haven't convinced you, but as soon as you say, well, I would do it for you, you're basically saying, as a customer, of course you're going to go around them, because now you have to go to their manager. So that's the one thing I'd say it's so important that salespeople, most of they're individual contributors, right? They work in an organization that has many layers of management for a company, big company, and they have to be the one that stands their ground and make it about you so that you don't give away your power.
I love it. Well, an interesting thing that we see in the work that we do is sales reps actually lose credibility with their buyers, and they'll oftentimes come back and say, hey, I lost that deal because of price. But when we go talk to the buyers, they say, no, it had nothing to do with price. The fact that they were willing to drop the price immediately the second I said something made me feel like they weren't being honest with me, like they were but when you hold firm to a value proposition, they'll pay, and you win. So that's great. Awesome. You guys are awesome. Thanks so much for taking some time. Thanks everybody for joining in. We'll let these guys get back to living the high life up here in the mountains of Utah.
All right.